During the fire drill, a janitor grabbed my arm. "This isn't a drill. Real fire starts in 3 minutes. I've burned alive here 40 times. The fire alarm screamed through Riverside Technical Institute at exactly 2:14 on a Friday afternoon, while I was walking toward the main stairwell with my laptop bag slung over my shoulder. Students and faculty streamed past me in the usual orderly chaos of a drill, everyone moving with the bored compliance of people who'd done this monthly routine for years. I was about to join the flow when a hand clamped around my bicep and yanked me sideways into a maintenance alcove. The janitor's face was inches from mine, his eyes wild with something that looked beyond panic into a realm of exhausted terror I'd never seen before. "Listen to me very carefully," he said, his breath coming in short gasps. "This isn't a drill. In exactly 3 minutes, a real fire will start in the electrical room on the second floor. It will spread to the chemistry lab storage, ignite the solvent cabinets, and turn this building into an inferno. 43 people will die in the west stairwell when it collapses. I've watched it happen 40 times. I've burned alive myself in 17 of those iterations. I've suffocated from smoke in 12 more. I've been crushed under debris in 8. Every single time, I wake up this morning at 6:15 and have to live through this day again." His name tag read Walter Gaines. I'd seen him around campus for the 3 years I'd been teaching engineering here, but we'd never spoken beyond polite nods. Now he was gripping my arm hard enough to leave marks and telling me he'd died 40 times. My first instinct was to pull away, to assume he was having some kind of mental health crisis. But something in his eyes stopped me. This wasn't the scattered confusion of delusion. This was the focused clarity of someone who'd lived through trauma so many times they could recite every detail. "The electrical room," he continued, without waiting for my response. "Adrian Keller is going to enter it at 2:16. He's going to pour accelerant on the main breaker panel and light it. He thinks everyone will be outside for the drill. He doesn't know that there are students still in the building. Doesn't care. By the time firefighters arrive, the west wing will be fully engulfed. The stairwell will be packed with people trying to evacuate, but the smoke will be too thick. They'll panic. They'll pile up at the door that swings inward instead of outward, building code violation that's been ignored for 15 years. They'll die there." I pulled my phone from my pocket. "I'm calling 911. Walter grabbed my wrist. "I've tried that. 17 times. They show up, they check, they find nothing because Keller hasn't started the fire yet. By the time they leave, it's too late. He waits until they're gone, then sets it anyway. The only way to stop this is to catch him in the act or prevent him from getting to the electrical room. We have 2 minutes and 40 seconds. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the accumulated weight of 40 deaths pressing down on his shoulders. This man wasn't crazy. He was traumatized beyond anything I could comprehend. "Who's Adrian Keller?" I asked, making the decision to believe him if only because the alternative was ignoring a potential threat that could be real. Walter's expression showed relief and desperation mixed together. "Assistant Facilities Director. He's been embezzling from the maintenance budget for 3 years, over $2 million. The annual audit starts Monday. They're going to find discrepancies in the electrical contractor invoices. Keller's been submitting bills for work that was never done, pocketing the difference. The records are all stored in paper files in the facilities office on the second floor, same location as the electrical room. If those files burn, the audit finds nothing. He collects insurance money as a bonus and retires to Mexico next month. I figured this out on day 23 after watching the fire investigation reports in the aftermath. Took me 12 more loops to confirm it by following Keller's movements throughout the day. We started moving toward the stairs, Walter pulling me along with urgent force. The hallways were emptying as the last stragglers filed toward the exits. "How did you approach him in previous loops?" I asked. Walter's jaw clenched. "On day 15, I confronted him directly. He stabbed me with a screwdriver and left me to die in the electrical room before setting the fire. On day 19, I tried to physically overpower him. He's stronger than he looks. He beat me unconscious, and I woke up in the fire. On day 28, I went to campus police beforehand. They laughed at me, asked if I'd been drinking. When the fire started, they assumed I was somehow involved. I spent that iteration's aftermath in jail." We reached the second floor, and Walter led me down a corridor I rarely used, away from my usual routes through the building. Students were still trickling out of classrooms, but this section was nearly empty. What's your plan now? I asked. Why did you grab me specifically? Walter stopped at a junction between hallways, checking his watch. Because you're the only person who's ever listened to me past the first 10 seconds. I've tried this approach with 14 different people in previous loops. They all pulled away, called security, or ignored me completely. You're still here. You're still asking questions. That's enough. He pointed down the left corridor. The electrical room is 40 feet that way. Keller will approach from the south entrance in 90 seconds. He's carrying a gym bag with 2 gallons of paint thinner stolen from the art department. We need to catch him with the accelerant before he can use it. And we need to call authorities while we have physical evidence. Once we do that, once someone in power actually sees what he's planning, the loop should break. It has to break. I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears. Every rational part of my brain said this was insane, that I was following a potentially unstable man into a confrontation based on claims about time loops and future fires. But the specificity of Walter's details, the exhaustion in his voice, the way he moved with absolute certainty about what was coming, all of it felt too authentic to ignore. We positioned ourselves in a recessed doorway with a clear view of the electrical room entrance. Walter handed me his phone, already open to the camera app. Record everything, he said. We need proof. Not just of him attempting arson, but of his intent. Let him talk. Let him explain. People believe video evidence. I took the phone, my hands shaking slightly. The hallway was silent, except for the distant fire alarm still blaring and the muffled sounds of evacuation happening elsewhere in the building. Then I heard footsteps, rapid and purposeful, echoing from the south corridor. Adrian Keller appeared, a muscular man in his mid-50s, wearing facilities department coveralls and carrying a dark blue gym bag that looked heavy from how it pulled at his shoulder. His face was set in hard concentration, focused entirely on his destination. He didn't see us as he passed our hiding spot. Walter waited until Keller reached the electrical room door and pulled out a key ring. Then he stepped out, blocking the corridor. Adrian, stop! Keller turned, his expression flashing through surprise to recognition to something cold and calculating in the space of 2 seconds. Walter, you should be outside with everyone else. Fire drill protocol. Walter's voice was steady despite the tension radiating from his body. There's no drill. You're going to set a fire to destroy evidence of your embezzlement. I know about the contractor fraud. I know about the $2 million. I know you're planning to burn the facility's office. Records. Keller's hand moved toward the gym bag, but I was already recording, stepping out to make my presence clear. I'm Professor Jameson from the engineering department, I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could manage. Whatever you're planning, there are witnesses now. Put the bag down and we can sort this out without anyone getting hurt. Keller's eyes darted between us, calculating odds and options. His hand was inside the gym bag now. You don't understand what you're interfering with, he said, his voice taking on a desperate edge. I've worked at this school for 27 years. 27 years of being underpaid, overworked, and ignored. The administration approved purchases that never happened, signed off on budgets that were pure fiction. I just took advantage of their incompetence. They owe me this money for everything I've done for this place. Walter took a step forward. So you were going to kill 43 people to cover it up? Burn down a building with students inside? Keller pulled his hand from the bag, and I saw the glint of metal. A lighter in one hand, something else in the other. His expression shifted into something harder. Nobody was supposed to die. Everyone was supposed to be outside. The fire would spread slow enough that anyone left behind would have time to escape. I've calculated this. I've planned every detail. You two are the only ones messing it up by being here. I was still recording, capturing every word. Adrian, put the lighter down. Campus police are already on their way. This doesn't have to get worse. That was a lie, but I needed him to hesitate. Keller's laugh was bitter and short. Police aren't coming. Everyone's outside dealing with the drill. By the time anyone notices something's wrong, the fire will be set and I'll be gone. You two can leave now, or you can burn with the evidence. Your choice. He turned toward the electrical room door, fumbling with his keys. Walter lunged forward, grabbing at the gym bag. Keller spun and swung the bag at Walter's head. The impact sent Walter stumbling backward into the wall. The gym bag fell, splitting open and spilling its contents across the floor. 2 plastic gallons of paint thinner, their caps slightly loose, leaked clear liquid that spread in a rapidly expanding pool. Keller dove for the lighter he'd dropped, his fingers closing around it. I didn't think. I just ran forward and kicked the lighter out of his hand, sending it skittering down the hallway. Keller looked up at me with pure rage and launched himself at my legs, tackling me to the ground. My phone clattered away, still recording from where it landed against the wall. Walter recovered and threw himself onto Keller's back, pulling him off me. They grappled on the floor, dangerously close to the pool of paint thinner that was now spreading toward the electrical room door. I scrambled to my feet and ran to the nearest fire alarm pull station, breaking the glass and yanking the handle. The alarm's tone changed from the steady evacuation signal to an urgent pulsing shriek. Then I pulled out my own phone and called 911, my voice coming out in a rush as I reported an assault in progress and a potential arson situation at Riverside Technical Institute, 2nd floor, East Wing. The dispatcher's questions came rapid fire, but I just kept repeating the location and the urgency while watching Walter and Keller continue to fight. Walter had age on his side, maybe 15 years younger and fueled by the desperate knowledge of what would happen if he failed. But Keller had rage and the strength of someone with nothing left to lose. They rolled away from the paint thinner pool, slamming into the wall. Keller got his hands around Walter's throat. I grabbed a fire extinguisher from its wall mount and brought it down on Keller's back. Not hard enough to cause serious injury, but enough to make him release his grip and turn toward me. His face was purple with exertion and fury. "You've ruined everything," he gasped. "Years of planning, years of carefully building my exit strategy. All destroyed because a janitor and some professor decided to play hero during a fire drill." Walter coughed and struggled to his feet. "I've watched you murder 43 people across 40 different timelines. You don't get to talk about ruined plans." Keller stared at him, confusion breaking through the anger. "What are you talking about? What timelines?" Then the sound of boots pounding up the stairwell cut through the alarm noise. Campus police burst into the corridor, 3 officers with hands on their weapons, taking in the scene. The spilled paint thinner, the gym bag, the 3 of us in various states of dishevelment, and Keller still on the floor looking guilty as hell. The lead officer, a woman named Captain Ortega, who I recognized from campus safety meetings, immediately started barking orders. 2 officers moved to separate us while the 3rd began photographing the scene. "Nobody move. Hands where I can see them. Someone want to explain what's happening here?" I pointed to my phone, still recording against the wall. "It's all on video. Adrian Keller was attempting to commit arson to destroy evidence of embezzlement. He attacked both of us when we tried to stop him. The paint thinner is his. He was going to use it to start a fire in the electrical room." Captain Ortega's expression went from confused to deadly serious in an instant. She moved to my phone, picking it up carefully and watching several seconds of the recording. Then she looked at Keller with contempt I could feel from 10 feet away. "Adrian Keller, you're under arrest for attempted arson, assault, and whatever other charges the DA decides to add. You have the right to remain silent." The officers cuffed Keller while he started protesting, claiming he was being framed, that the paint thinner wasn't his, that this was all a misunderstanding. The next several hours blurred into a series of official procedures. The fire department arrived to clean up the paint thinner spill and inspect the electrical room for any other hazards. They found evidence that someone had tampered with the breaker panel earlier, disabling safety features that would have prevented the kind of catastrophic electrical fire Keller had been planning. More police arrived, including detectives from the city's arson investigation unit. Walter and I gave separate statements, mine focusing on what I'd witnessed directly, his including details about Keller's embezzlement scheme that seemed to surprise the investigators. When they asked how he knew about the financial fraud, Walter said he'd overheard conversations and noticed discrepancies in work orders, close enough to the truth without mentioning time loops. The school's administration arrived, including President Dorothy Vance, who looked shell-shocked at the revelation that her assistant facilities director had been planning mass arson. She immediately authorized full cooperation with investigators and promised a comprehensive audit of all facilities department finances. The evacuation was extended for hours while authorities processed the crime scene. Students and faculty gathered outside in confused clusters, rumors spreading faster than any official information. I saw colleagues I'd worked with for years, people who'd been unknowingly minutes away from burning alive if Walter hadn't grabbed my arm. The weight of that realization was crushing. My phone buzzed with messages from friends asking if I was okay, if I knew what was really happening. I didn't answer any of them. By 6 that evening, they'd released us to go home with instructions to remain available for follow-up interviews. Walter and I stood in the parking lot as the sun set, the building behind us still surrounded by emergency vehicles and yellow tape. "Did it work?" I asked quietly. "Is the loop broken?" Walter closed his eyes, his face showing a complex mixture of hope and fear. "I don't know yet. The loop always reset when I went to sleep. I've never made it past midnight on this day. If I wake up tomorrow morning at 6:15 again, then nothing we did mattered. If I wake up Saturday, then it's finally over." I didn't know what to say to that. The exhaustion in his voice was so profound, it made my chest hurt. "The things you told the police about the embezzlement, how did you really know all that?" Walter opened his eyes and looked at me directly. "On day 23 after the fire, I went through the burned building wreckage during investigations, found partially destroyed documents, took photos with my phone. On day 24, I had a whole day before the fire to examine those photos and trace the paper trail. Took me 8 more loops to gather enough evidence to understand the full scope of what Keller was doing. Another 9 loops trying different approaches to stop him. This is the first time I've made it this far without someone dying." The casualty in his voice when he said, "someone dying," made my blood run cold. He'd watched people burn, including himself, 40 times. No one should have to carry memories that heavy. The investigation into Keller's activities expanded rapidly over the following days. Forensic accountants descended on the facilities department, pulling apart years of financial records. What they found was staggering. Keller hadn't just embezzled $2 million. The fraud went back 7 years and totaled over $4 million through fake contractors, inflated invoices, and phantom repair projects. He'd built an entire network of shell companies with fake business registrations, fabricated insurance certificates, and forged signatures. The scheme was sophisticated enough that it had survived multiple routine audits because nobody had reason to look closely at the facility's budget. Everything appeared legitimate on the surface. It was only the upcoming, comprehensive audit, with its deeper examination of supporting documentation, that would have exposed the fraud. Keller's plan to destroy the records before that audit wasn't just about hiding money. It was about preventing criminal prosecution. Without the paper trail, investigators would have had nothing concrete to build a case on. The fire would have looked accidental, caused by aging electrical infrastructure that Keller himself had been supposedly maintaining. It was a near-perfect crime, foiled only because a janitor had lived through the aftermath 40 times and finally found someone willing to believe him. The school faced its own reckoning. How had this fraud continued undetected for 7 years? Why hadn't internal controls caught it earlier? President Vance ordered an external review of all financial procedures and supervision protocols. What that review found made the embezzlement look almost minor. The facilities department had been operating with essentially no oversight for over a decade. Budget approvals were rubber-stamped without verification. Work orders were signed off without inspection. Invoices were paid without comparing them to actual deliverables. Keller had exploited systematic institutional negligence that existed long before he started stealing. But there was something else, something that made me angrier than the financial fraud. Walter had tried to report concerns about facility safety issues 7 different times over the past 3 years. Broken fire doors in the West Wing that didn't close properly. Emergency lighting that hadn't been tested in years. The stairwell door that swung inward instead of outward. A building code violation that had existed since construction. He'd submitted formal work orders, sent emails to supervisors, even spoken directly to Keller about the hazards. Every single report had been ignored, dismissed, or lost in bureaucratic indifference. Walter was just a janitor. His observations didn't matter to people who made decisions. When investigators interviewed other facilities staff, they confirmed Walter's reputation as someone who noticed things, who cared about safety, who tried to follow proper procedures. They also confirmed that management never took him seriously. He was maintenance staff, not an engineer or administrator. What did he know about building codes or safety regulations? This casual dismissal of Walter's expertise because of his job title wasn't just insulting. It was dangerous. It had created the conditions where Keller could operate freely and where safety violations could persist indefinitely. The criminal case against Keller moved forward with unusual speed. The video evidence from Walter's phone and my recording were ironclad. Keller, attempting arson with clear intent to destroy evidence of financial crimes, was caught in high definition from multiple angles. His own words admitting the embezzlement and justifying the planned fire were recorded clearly. His attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but prosecutors were unwilling to reduce charges. This wasn't just fraud and attempted arson. 43 people had been in the building during the fire drill. If Keller's plan had succeeded, if the fire had spread as intended, people would have died. The fact that Walter's warnings had prevented those deaths didn't diminish Keller's culpability for attempting mass murder. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Walter and I both testified, describing the confrontation in detail. Forensic accountants explained the embezzlement scheme. Fire investigators demonstrated how Keller's planned arson would have spread, using computer models that showed the West Wing becoming fully engulfed within 6 minutes. They showed how the stairwell would have become a death trap, how the improper door swing would have prevented evacuation, how smoke would have filled the upper floors faster than people could escape. They showed casualty projections, 43 deaths, 78 injuries, hundreds of thousands of dollars in property damage, all to hide $4 million in theft. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before finding Keller guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 35 years in prison, noting that the only reason it wasn't a life sentence was because the actual fire had been prevented. Walter wasn't in the courtroom when the verdict was read. I looked for him in the gallery but didn't see him anywhere. After the sentencing, I went looking and found him sitting on a bench outside the courthouse, staring at nothing. "We won," I said, sitting down next to him. "He's going to prison for decades. Justice was served." Walter nodded slowly. "I know. I'm glad. But I keep thinking about the 40 times it didn't work. The 40 versions of this day where people died. Where I died. Those timelines don't exist anymore, but I remember them. I remember the smell of burning flesh. I remember the sound of people screaming as they were crushed in the stairwell. I remember the moment when the smoke got so thick I couldn't breathe anymore and my lungs were burning and I knew I was about to die. I remember all of it, and nobody else does. Nobody else can." I sat with him in silence, understanding there was nothing I could say that would make that better. He carried memories of events that had been erased from reality when the loop finally broke. Memories of trauma that had no external validation, no shared experience, no witnesses except himself. "Do you ever doubt that it was real?" I asked quietly. "Do you ever wonder if the time loops were some kind of psychological break, and this is the only timeline that actually happened?" Walter considered that for a long moment. "I've thought about it. Maybe I'm just crazy. Maybe I had a nervous breakdown and hallucinated dying 40 times. But the specifics I knew about Keller's plan, the exact timing, the exact method, the exact location of the accelerant, how would I have known all that without living through it? How would I have known about the embezzlement? I was just a janitor who cleaned floors and fixed broken toilets. I wasn't supposed to know anything about financial fraud." We sat on that bench for over an hour while the sun moved across the sky and the courthouse emptied around us. Eventually, Walter's phone buzzed with a text message. He looked at it and something in his expression softened slightly. "My daughter," he explained, "asking if I'm okay, if I want to come over for dinner tonight. I haven't seen her in 3 months. Been too wrapped up in my own head, dealing with the investigation and the trial and the memories of things that didn't happen." He stood up, pocketing his phone. "Thank you for believing me that day. Thank you for not dismissing me as crazy or pulling away when I grabbed your arm. You saved 43 lives by trusting someone who had no credibility, no status, no reason for you to listen to. That matters more than you know." I watched him walk away toward the parking structure, his shoulders still carrying weight that nobody else could see. The next several months brought sweeping changes to Riverside Technical Institute. The facilities department was completely restructured with new oversight procedures and mandatory safety audits. Every building code violation Walter had previously reported was addressed and corrected. The West Wing stairwell door was replaced with one that swung outward. Fire doors were repaired. Emergency lighting was updated. A new position was created: Safety Compliance Officer, responsible for investigating and acting on any safety concerns raised by any staff member regardless of their position or rank. Walter was offered the job. He turned it down, saying he preferred to keep doing what he'd always done, but he did agree to serve on the newly formed Safety Advisory Committee. The school established a whistleblower protection policy and anonymous reporting system for anyone who witnessed misconduct or safety violations. They partnered with external auditors to review all departmental finances quarterly rather than annually. They implemented a system where every invoice over $5,000 required verification with actual completed work before payment was processed. These changes came too late to prevent Keller's fraud, but would hopefully prevent future exploitation. I threw myself into teaching and research, trying to process what had happened. My engineering students became the recipients of frequent lectures about ethical responsibility, about how technical expertise meant nothing if you didn't use it to protect people, about how ignoring warnings from those with less institutional power was how disasters happened. Some students found my intensity off-putting. Others seemed to understand I was teaching from experience, not theory. 6 months after Keller's sentencing, Walter knocked on my office door during afternoon hours. He looked different, lighter somehow, as though some of the weight had finally lifted. "I wanted to update you," he said, sitting in the chair across from my desk. "It's been 183 days since that Friday. 183 mornings where I've woken up and it was a new day instead of the same day repeating. The loop is definitely broken. I'm finally moving forward in time with everyone else." Relief flooded through me. "That's incredible. How are you doing with the memories? Are they fading at all?" Walter shook his head. "No, they're still as vivid as ever. I remember every detail of every loop. But I'm learning to live with them. My daughter helped me find a therapist who specializes in trauma. She doesn't fully understand when I talk about time loops and dying repeatedly, but she helps me process the feelings attached to those memories. That's what matters." He pulled out an envelope and placed it on my desk. "I wanted to give you this. It's a letter I wrote to myself on day 40, the morning of the last loop. I was exhausted and desperate and certain I'd never break free. I wrote down everything I remembered, everyone who died, every method I'd tried to stop it. I wanted there to be some record in case I didn't make it. Now I don't need it anymore, and I thought you should have it. You're the only other person who knows the full story." I opened the envelope carefully and read the first few lines. The handwriting was shaky, the words tinged with despair, listing names of people who had died in various loops and describing their final moments in painful detail. I looked up at Walter. "Are you sure you want me to have this? This is deeply personal." He nodded. "I'm sure. Somebody needs to know. Somebody needs to remember that those 40 timelines happened, even if they got erased. You believed me when nobody else would. That makes you the keeper of this truth." I put the letter back in the envelope and locked it in my desk drawer. "I'll keep it safe. And Walter, thank you for not giving up. 40 times you lived through hell and kept trying to fix it. That's not just heroism. That's something beyond what I have words for." 2 years after the fire that never happened, Riverside Technical Institute held a ceremony dedicating a new campus safety center. The building housed the expanded facilities department, the safety compliance office, and emergency response coordination. A plaque near the entrance acknowledged Walter Gaines for his exceptional dedication to campus safety and his instrumental role in preventing a catastrophic incident. The plaque didn't mention time loops or dying 40 times or watching people burn. That truth remained between Walter and me, too strange and too painful to share publicly. Walter attended the ceremony with his daughter and 2 grandchildren I didn't know he had. Seeing him smile genuinely while holding his granddaughter's hand made something in my chest loosen. He'd survived not just the loops, but the aftermath. He'd found a way to keep living despite carrying memories that would break most people. President Vance gave a speech about the importance of listening to all voices in the campus community, about how safety was everyone's responsibility, about how the school had learned painful lessons about institutional accountability. Some of it rang hollow to me, corporate speak covering up systematic failures that had taken a near disaster to correct. But some of it seemed sincere, particularly when Vance looked directly at Walter and said, "Our maintenance and facilities staff are not just service providers. They're the people who know our buildings best, who see problems before they become crises. who keep us safe every single day. We failed to listen when we should have. That won't happen again. After the ceremony, Walter and I stood near the new building, watching students pass by without any idea how close they'd come to not being there. "Do you ever tell people?" I asked. "About the loops? About what you went through?" Walter shook his head. "Only my daughter knows the full truth, and only because she demanded to know why I had such severe PTSD after an incident that technically didn't result in any casualties. She half believes me. I think she assumes it was some kind of trauma-induced false memories, mixed with genuine intuition about Keller's plans. That's fine. I don't need her to fully believe. I just need her to listen." He looked at the building, at the plaque with his name, at the campus continuing around us. The thing about time loops is that they teach you something most people never learn. Every day matters. Every choice matters. The difference between 43 people dying and 43 people living was me grabbing your arm at exactly the right moment and you choosing to believe me instead of pulling away. One moment, one choice, and entire futures changed. Most people go through life not understanding how fragile everything is, how much depends on tiny decisions. I thought about that often over the following years, how I'd been seconds away from brushing Walter off, from treating him as just another person having a crisis, from walking out of the building during the drill and never looking back, how the entire trajectory of dozens of lives had pivoted on my choice to listen to someone I had no reason to trust. 5 years after the fire that never was, I received notification that Adrian Keller had died in prison. Heart attack, the report said. He was serving year 5 of his 35-year sentence. I called Walter to tell him, not sure how he'd react. "Good," Walter said simply. "He can't hurt anyone now. He can't try again. It's finally over." But it wasn't really over, not for Walter. I knew from our occasional conversations that he still had nightmares about burning, still woke up sometimes convinced it was Friday at 6:15 a.m. again, still carried the weight of 40 deaths that existed only in his memory. His therapist said he had complex PTSD from trauma that he couldn't prove had happened, which made treatment challenging. How do you heal from wounds with no external scars, from experiences no one else witnessed? 10 years later, I'd moved to a different university, pursuing research in structural safety and building systems. My work focused on preventing the kinds of failures that led to disasters, on creating better protocols for responding to safety concerns, on ensuring that warnings from any source were properly evaluated rather than dismissed based on the reporter's status. My colleagues knew I'd been involved in stopping an arson attempt years ago, but most didn't know the details. I kept Walter's letter locked in a safe deposit box, still the only other person who knew the full truth of what had happened across 40 erased timelines. Walter retired from janitorial work at 68, but stayed active on the Safety Advisory Committee. He gave talks at regional conferences about the importance of listening to maintenance staff, about how the people who worked closest to a facility's infrastructure often knew about problems before anyone in administration. 15 years after grabbing my arm in that hallway, Walter had a stroke. His daughter called to let me know he was in the hospital, condition stable, but serious. I drove 6 hours to visit him, finding him in a private room with monitors tracking his vital signs. He looked smaller in the hospital bed, older than I'd ever seen him. "Hey, Professor," he said when I entered, his speech slightly slurred from the stroke. "Still teaching kids about safety?" I pulled a chair close to his bedside. "Every semester. I tell them about the janitor who saved 43 lives by refusing to give up, even after dying 40 times. I don't mention the time loop part, but I tell them about trusting expertise regardless of where it comes from." Walter smiled weakly. "The loops haunt me less now. Used to. Wake up panicking every morning, checking to make sure it wasn't Friday again. Now it's just occasional nightmares. Progress, I guess." We talked for an hour about his grandchildren, about his daughter's career, about the small satisfactions of a life lived fully after coming so close to being trapped in one day forever. As I was leaving, Walter called me back. "If I don't make it through this, if this is the end, I want you to know something. Those 40 loops were hell, but they taught me that impossible things are just things that haven't been properly attempted yet. Nobody believed time loops were real. Nobody believed a janitor could uncover massive fraud. Nobody believed we could prevent a fire that hadn't started yet. We did all of it anyway. That's the lesson worth remembering. Walter survived the stroke but never fully recovered. He lived another 2 years in assisted care, his daughter visiting daily, his grandchildren bringing brightness to his diminished mobility. I visited when I could, and we'd talk about anything except the loops. He seemed content to let that chapter of his life remain closed, remembered, but not dwelled upon. When he died peacefully in his sleep at 70 years old, his daughter asked me to speak at the funeral. I stood before a small gathering of family and former colleagues and told the sanitized version of his heroism, the one that didn't include time loops or dying repeatedly or memories of people burning alive. I talked about his dedication to safety, his attention to detail, his refusal to be dismissed despite his institutional position. I told them he'd saved lives through alertness and courage. It was true, just not the whole truth. After the service, his daughter gave me a small box. "Dad wanted you to have this. He said you'd understand what it meant." Inside was a simple digital watch, frozen at 2:14. The exact time the fire drill alarm had sounded on that Friday 41 timelines ago. I keep it on my desk now, next to Walter's letter and my own notes about what really happened. Someday, maybe decades from now, someone might find these items and piece together the impossible story of a janitor who lived the same day 40 times and finally, on the 41st iteration, managed to save everyone. 20 years after the fire that never was, Riverside Technical Institute is still standing, its West Wing renovated and updated, its safety protocols comprehensive and rigorously enforced. The students who would have died in that stairwell have graduated, built careers, had children of their own who now walk the same halls their parents once fled. None of them know how close they came to not existing. That knowledge exists only in Walter's letter, in my memories, and now, perhaps, in whatever records might outlast both of us. Some victories are private. Some heroes die carrying truths nobody else can verify. Walter Gaines grabbed my arm during a fire drill and told me something impossible. I chose to believe him. 43 people lived because of that choice. That's the only proof that matters in the end. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.